Afternoon, I am Dr. Bhabani. Today we are going to discuss testing of hypothesis in Unit 7 of Marketing Research. So the contents are like introduction of hypothesis, concept and the meaning of hypothesis, importance of hypothesis in marketing research, and concept of hypothesis testing, process of hypothesis testing, use of SPSS for hypothetical case analysis. After that, we will conclude with a summary of this chapter, testing of hypothesis. So the learning outcomes of this chapter is to able and understand the concept and meaning of hypothesis, appreciate the importance of hypothesis in marketing research, describe the steps involved in conducting a test of hypothesis or the process of testing hypothesis, then apply the same concept learning to a practical market decision making situations to take decision for the marketing project. So, a decision maker may have a probability of being misled or misled while making a decision based on data. So, this can be the result of faulty assumptions or observations and inadequate data, or you can say existence of undefined variables. So, this is a risk since crucial stages of decisions based on incomplete information may result in resources as well as missed opportunities and many other situations. So, the true benefit of hypothesis testing in business is that it enables experts to avail their hypothesis before acting on them, or you can say before doing any kind of activity on the research problem, a researcher need to be verified and need to understand what should be my hypothesis so that I can test my research problem. So as we discussed in prior units, the problem statement of the marketing research or any kind of research, the problem statement cannot be tested directly. So to taste or to prove or to get the solution of this kind of problem, we need to frame some hypothesis which is able to be tested. As we know, the hypothesis is nothing but the based on the statement based on the objectives. So as a result, a business can essentially confirm that its analysis is accurate before allocating resources to the implementation of a more comprehensive strategy. So we will discuss the concept, meaning, importance and process of hypothesis testing in this unit of testing of hypothesis. So in the concept and meaning of hypothesis, we can say open-ended research questions. As earlier we discussed, open-ended research questions means the questions or the respondent have a free space to give his or her answer. It is not MCQs, it is not tick the correct answer like questions. He or she has to explain the answer. So in that case, what we will do, now we have to provide a wider perspective on a problem. So, in order to focus data gathering on a few key aspects of the research questions are transformed into hypothesis. So, this means that the more general idea of a research question is stated in terms of a particular variables as a potential response to the research questions. So, in addition, a hypothesis can be a statement that links two or more variables generated from one or more research questions. So, this relationship must also be investigated to determine whether it is true or untrue. So, we can say that hypotheses are expressed in terms of quantifiable variable. So, let us give an example to explain the concept. Let us understand the research question. What is the question? Now, identify the factors influencing the performance of a salesperson. So, this is our research questions. So, what will be my hypothesis? Now, from the research questions, what I frame the hypothesis is marital status of salesman or salesperson has significant effect on sales performance. So, what is the factor here? The marital status, but it is not in the research questions. So the hypothesis has limited the scope of data collection as opposed to the research questions which would have required information for a number of additional variables including gender, age, work experience and others. In order to determine the profile of a salesperson, so what here we have done now in our research questions, the only question was what are the factors to be identified that is influencing sales performance of a salesperson. But in hypothesis, what we said now we talked about the marital status of the of the salespersons, where other demographic factor we ignored. That is what gender, age, occupation, all these things we ignore. So it gives a clear frame that we need to focus on the marital status of the salesperson first. So the aforementioned hypothesis can be expressed as follows to show a relationship between two or more research questions. So the second question is sales training programs would influence unmarried salespeople to perform better. So if this one is the my first research questions, then coming to the second or on the based on basis on the first research questions, the second questions or second hypothesis we frame that sales training programs would influence unmarried sales people to perform better. If marital status is hampering, then it implies that sales training programs for unmarried salespeople definitely will perform better. So, this is our second hypothesis. Therefore, the hypothesis helped to focus the effort of data collection. So, what the importance of hypothesis? Now, after defining these two hypotheses from the research questions, now it becomes easy for the investigator or the researcher, those persons are involved in the data collection. Now they are become more focused on a particular factor. So it is now easy for them not to consider other factor, not to consider other demographic factor, but also we have to focus more on these factors which is defined in our hypothesis. So hypothesis is actually the assumption regarding the anticipated direction of the research findings. So what we have did here, now we are anticipating that if the salesperson performance case is there or this is a situation, so what are the probable situation that is influencing? So we anticipate that it is the marital status. So once we anticipating that means we are interested to find the solution or the reaction or the result of the data towards this direction. The first benefit is the data collection person or the investigator now more focused, and also it gives us a direction for the research findings. Another example, it can be expected that the research will focus on determining whether there is a direct relationship between training and salespeople's performance or not. It is also another things now it become easy for our part to analyze the data also, and the more effectively sales training imparts selling skills, the better the salesperson performances in turning prospective consumers into actual purchasers of goods and services. This is another most important part or the concept or the direction, or you can say the importance of the hypothesis. So, according to Killinger, a hypothesis is a conjectural statement of the relationship between two or more variables. Here we have seen, so in research questions, it was no such relationship was reflected. But when we frame the hypothesis, we give a relation between two variables, that is the salesperson performance with the marital status of the salespersons. The same definition has been given by another author. So, according to Greenhill, in 1903, what he said, now a hypothesis is written in such a way that it can be proven or disproven by valid and reliable data. It is in order to obtain this data that we perform our study. So, what is the another thing is here? Now, by Grinnell, what he said now, what hypothesis we are framing. No doubt we are reflecting or we are floating some variables or identifying some variable in the hypothesis. Hypothesis is directional, it is given direction, it is give us the way forward to how to focus on which variable we need to be focused. At the same way, we are not saying that what hypothesis we are framing, it is always true. So it may be proven, it may be disproven. Sometimes what we have stated in our null hypothesis, sometimes it is rejected. So nowhere it is mentioned or nowhere it is relied that the whatever hypothesis we are writing, that will be definitely accepted. So acceptance or rejection on the basis of what? Now on the basis of reliable data and valid data. So data will say what hypothesis we have framed, what hypothesis we have done from the research question, whether it is accepted or rejected. So the hypotheses are always in declarative sentence statement form. In contrast to the research problem, in which typically takes the forms of the questions. So the statements constructed in this way are subject to the empirical investigation. So, talking about what is the nature and what is the sense of hypothesis, we can see here hypothesis is always a declarative statement. Something it is declaring, and it is not a paragraph, it is a statement only, and it is in context to the research problem, which typically takes the forms of a question. The statements constructed in this way are subject to empirical investigation. As we said, how to empirically investigate these things? Now, by the data only. If the data is in favor of the statement, then the hypothesis is accepted. If the data is not in favor of this statement, then the hypothesis is rejected. That is why in next slides we will discuss then what to do if a hypothesis is rejected or accepted. If it is accepted, no doubt we will work on that direction, but if it is rejected, what to do? So how many hypotheses to be framed? All these things we will discuss. But before that, we should discuss what should be the characteristics of a good hypothesis. The first characteristics is the formulation of a hypothesis must be straightforward, declarative, and explicit. As we discussed, it might not be possible to empirically test a broad hypothesis. So, as we said, the hypothesis should be empirical, declarative, and a statement that should not be very broad. Because if it is so, then it is too difficult to test that. So therefore, it could be wise to simplify the hypothesis and simply test one relationship between two variables at the same time. And the second characteristic is, in order to establish the statistical validity of the relationship, a hypothesis must be measurable and quantifiable. If we are framing the hypothesis and we are interested for use of any statistical use, then that must be quantifiable. The hypothesis must be quantifiable and measurable, and a hypothesis needs to be linked to the body of existing knowledge rather than the researcher's intuition or subjective judgment. So, it should be free from researcher's intuition or subjective judgment. Whatever we are written previously, as in the previous slide, we saw what two hypotheses we framed from the subject of the researcher, not from the researcher's intuition. Then the fourth one is testing the statistical significance of the hypothesized relationship is a necessary step in the validation of the hypothesis. This indicates that it can be described in terms that can be measured. If something cannot be measured, it cannot be tested, and hence no conclusion can be made. As we said, it should be quantifiable. Now why it is so? Now if it is not quantifiable, then it cannot be tested. If we are unable to test the hypothesis, then how could we draw any conclusion? So it is really required to test, and it is really required the hypothesis must be quantifiable, and it is measurable. Now coming to the third concept of the content is importance of hypothesis in marketing research. So researchers are frequently questioned about the significance of having hypothesis in marketing research. Why cannot you just out and gather data analysis it and then formulate hypothesis? There is a questions that many a time people think, why cannot you just go out and gather data analysis and gather data, analyze it, and then formulate hypothesis? Is it a right process? This is the questions. But if you limit yourselves to evaluating only a few possibilities before conducting the research, will not be limit you, won't it limit you? So there is a distinction between fascinating data and significant data, as market researchers like to say. So it is just a reverse process if you will say that simply we will gather data, then we will analyze it, then we will formulate the hypothesis. It is not possible actually, because from the questions only we are formulating hypothesis. If hypothesis is not there, then in which direction we will go for the data collection? So this is the first questions. So what we will have to do now, we will not to follow this line that first we'll gather the data, then analyze, and then we'll formulate. But I have to formulate the hypothesis first, then we'll gather the data, then we will go for the analyze, which will help us to conclude the research. But while at the same time, some researchers think that having a hypothesis is necessary in order to perform a study. Having a hypothesis is not necessary in situations when the researchers lack support of relevant literature or market expertise to turn a research questions into hypothesis. If such things will happen, that some situations such like that, no such literature is there, no such expertise are there. So what to do? How to conclude or how to draw hypothesis from the problem? So here are some additional reasons why having hypothesis in marketing research is crucial. So a hypothesis significantly accomplishes the following tasks. What are the tasks? And the development of a hypothesis maximizes the value of your study. This is the most important part. You could believe that the sole purpose of conducting marketing research is to obtain data. So there may be other objectives that could be translated into hypothesis, though within that basic demand of the marketing knowledge. So why did you initially wish to conduct research? The questions are like this. Is it because you are unsure about your next step or which participants to approach? Third question is coming like this. Is it because you are contemplating trying and something new, that is why you are going for the marketing research? So such questions are there. But are you ensuring that if we should do that process, do you follow that process? It's critical to be clear about your need when conducting marketing research actually. So the following may be some needs for my marketing research. What are the needs? Now the research problem may be uncertainty about how diversity into new markets. This is the situation and it is very challenging also. And the concern with this hypothesis maybe how successfully the brand's core message will translate, and the outcome may be that packaging designing significantly affect the entry into a new market. For example, shampoo in a sachet at a very low price was introduced in the rural market in India. Then the problem may be wanting a change but not knowing how to proceed. So previously, as per the example, what was happening? It is nowadays also it is available that in rural area or in villages you can see the shampoos are in such a their sales figure is something higher than the bottle shampoo. Or but how we get that? How the shampoo company get that situation that no, this is the preferable quantity and the reference prices is required for the village or the villagers or the rural peoples? No. It is not came in the dreams of a manufacturer, but it is the marketing research. That researcher collect the data, and the data says it is the demand, it is the ability of the people of the village or the rural people, they can say they can purchase. So these things came only with the help of hypothesis only. And through the hypothesis, appropriate hypothesis, the collected data helps us again to perform the such kind of action by the company. So the problem may be wanting to change but not knowing how to proceed. So hypothesis assume that the product like extension would be accepted. This result may be that brand image has significantly increased confidence in the product line extension. Then the next situation is uncertainty about the market to target. The target market is price sensitive. It may be hypothesized, however, it may not be true. So, if the situation is like that, the target is uncertain. So, what to do in that case? So, here in that case, in the case of uncertainty, we have to assume something. So it may be like price sensitive. So this is our assumption. Well, before doing anything, there is a assumption in our mind. With that assumption, we need to move. After that, we will find when we will move forward, then we will find that whether our assumption is correct, or it is accepted, or it is rejected. That will teach us whether the hypothesis was true, or it is not, actually it is may not be true. These are the possibility in the some uncertain situations. Taking into account your competitors, market share, and positioning, the hypothesis may be to determine how well the brand position resonate with different target audiences. This result may be that the brand is well positioned in certain target market and has an opportunity to significantly increase market share in selected region or territories. Now, the second is it may occasionally provide more unexpected information, which is always exciting. So, the testing of a popular hypothesis does not eliminate that it will again happen. So, however, by formulating hypothesis, you can be certain that the new knowledge resulting from your work would not make your original concerns that uncertainties are any more complicated. By formulating hypotheses in advance and making sure to put them up for study to get clarification on them, it is simpler to ensure that you will at least have answers to the main concerns, that is whether it is true, it is false, or it is not clear. So, thus, the development of a hypothesis improves objectivity in a study by giving it a focus. As from the beginning, we are discussing the hypothesis actually make us more focus on our objectivity, or you can say it gives us a right direction of our study. Then the third important factor is to prevent delusions at the conclusion of the study. So it may occasionally, the third one is having a structure for formulating and accessing survey questions. So using hypothesis also, it aids us in keeping surveys focused and concise, which is an additional advantage. The data quality would not suffer if you are clear on the hypothesis you need to test with the survey before you go in and get out from the survey and locate the answers you need. Two, frequently people disagree passionately about survey questions choices and wording them. Without the framework of understanding what hypothesis you are testing, it is difficult to identify the constitutes excellent questions. So, in fourth importance, we can say having a plan for assessing the outcomes. If you begin your research with hypothesis, you will already be aware of the topic of the research presentation, which will be testing and analyzing the hypothesis. So, you can be prepared to describe what the study revealed regarding the hypothesis and to propose subsequent steps in light of those findings. So you might be able to improve a theory by using the hypothesis. It all allows you to determine precisely what is true and what is false. Now coming to the concept of hypothesis of testing. So we understand what is the importance of hypothesis, what do we mean by hypothesis, from where the hypothesis will come, and how it is important for a research we understood, for data collection, all these things we understood. But now is the time how the concept of hypothesis testing actually framed and it works. So we will now discuss about these ideas, that testing of hypothesis. So before going to that concept, let us imagine that XYZ, there is a corporation, is considering updating the product's packaging. There is a corporation, there is some product in that corporation, and the company actually considering updating the product's packaging. So the item was formerly kept in a glass jar and the company wants to replace them with plastic containers. However, it wants to hear from its customers first to see if they prefer the new packaging or if they are more inclined to stick with the present one. So, what is the situation? And there is a corporation with some product, and there was a previous packaging system in a glass jar of that product. But now, company is thinking about to change the containing container into the glass container into plastic container. But the problem is here, the manufacturer or the corporation head is willing to know or to hear from its consumer that whether they want the same package or they want to say or to stick on the previous packaging system. For example, the hypothesis can be put forth in the following ways: there is no difference. So, before going to such hypothesis, we must again discuss the situation. Now, if this is the problem, what is the problem here? You can say it is a what is the visible problem here? Whether XYZ packaging is a problem? No. The problem is that the manufacturer wants to hear from the customer whether they want the previous package or the existing package or the new packaging system. So the hypothesis definitely will be drawn from the last line. What is the last line? Now customers first to see if they prefer the new packaging or if they are more inclined to stick with the present one. So what are the possible assumptions? The possible assumptions are there is no difference in consumer preferences for glass jar or plastic containers. So the first statement says there is no difference in customers' mind, or you can say customers are 50-50 agree, or they are agree with any changes. It may be plastic jar, it may be glass container, all are agree with that. Second is there is difference in consumers' preferences for glass jar and plastic containers. Another assumption is there in the mind of a producer. There is a difference in consumer preference. First statement is saying there is no difference. Customers are happy if you are providing plastic jars instead of glass. There is no difference, no complaints. They agree. But the second statement says there is a difference in consumer preferences for glass jar and plastic containers. There is a difference means there is some choice. It means the second assumption says there is a choice. So what are the choice? Glass jar are more preferred than plastic containers as packaging materials. Third one. So what third says, when the second statement came to us, there is a difference means Either customers is willing or inclining towards the glass jar, or the customers is inclining towards the plastic jar. That on the basis of the second statement, the third statement says glass jars are more preferred than the plastic containers. Why? The fourth assumption automatically came from the second statement that the plastic containers are more preferred than the glass jar packaging material. So, if we will observe this four statement or four assumptions, first assumption is there is no difference. But when the second statement came that there is a difference, then what are the possible differences? The possible differences are like this: either customers are willing for the glasses, or there is one preference. If there is a difference in preference, the first, it may be a preference that consumers are preferring glass. Well, then what is the another preference? The consumers are willing for the plastic containers, not the glass. So these are the possible way of drawing hypothesis from that previous one line of question. So a null hypothesis is a type of hypothesis that states that there is no difference between two situations. What we have seen here. So first statement that there is no difference is known as the null hypothesis, which actually represented as H0. H0, or you can say the null hypothesis, always says what is there in the theory, it is there. The what it is a status quo situation. What you are saying, what is the question is saying, it is there. So there is no difference. Null hypotheses are those that are put forth with the intention of being rejected. So when we are framing the null hypothesis, we are in the intention that this hypothesis is going to be rejected. So the null hypothesis in respect of preference of glass jar and plastic containers is represented here as H0 is equal to mu G is equal to mu P. It says the person or the people are liking glass jar is same as the people those are preferring the plastic container. So there is no difference. Both are equal. Mu G is equal to mu P. Mu stands for the mean, G stands for glass container. Here also P stands for plastic container. Where H0 represents the null hypothesis, mu Z is the mean occurrence or mean score of glass jar preferences, and mu P is the mean score for plastic container preference. Rejection of null hypothesis leads to the acceptance of the alternative hypothesis. So when there is a concept of null hypothesis, then immediately there is a alternative hypothesis. What do you mean by alternative hypothesis? The alternative hypothesis is just the mathematical opposite of the null hypothesis. If the null hypothesis is saying it is equal, then definitely the alternative hypothesis will say it is not equal. In our case, if we will go back to the previous statement that there is no difference in assumption that the consumer preference for glass jar and plastic containers, if it is no difference, then the alternative hypothesis will be just opposite of the past statement. There is a difference. There is a difference. This is the things which happen in this is the relation between H0 and H1. Why it is so? Now, as we declared in the null hypothesis are framed to being rejected. As we discussing in the previous slide that if my assumption is rejected, then what to do? Now, what to do? For doing something, we have to frame an alternative hypothesis. It means whenever we are rejecting our null hypothesis, immediately we will go for the acceptance of the alternative hypothesis. But simultaneously, both the hypotheses cannot occur. Both rejection and acceptance of the same statement cannot occur. So it is the two sides of the coin. If head is coming, then tail will never come. If tail is coming, then head will never come. It's the same way. If null hypothesis is rejected, then definitely alternative is accepted. It will never be rejected. In the same way, if we are rejecting the alternative hypothesis, we can say null hypothesis is to be accepted, cannot be rejected. So the rejection of null hypothesis indicates that the relationship between variables in case of four examples of difference between mean score of glass and plastic container preferences have given statistical significance, and the acceptance of the null hypothesis indicates that these differences are due to chance. So when we are rejecting null hypothesis, it means we are accepting hypothesis. Then what is the meaning of this? Now these differences came. Now for what reason? Now it is due to chance only. So the alternative hypothesis can cover a whole range of values rather than a single point. So the alternative hypotheses are denoted by H1. Now the third concept of testing hypothesis is type 1 error and type 2 error. Before going to that, we can see here the symbolically how H0 and H1 will be written. In previous slide, we have seen here, you can say the H0 equal to mu G and mu P. This is the way how we will write the null hypothesis. But how we will write the alternative hypothesis? As I said, if null hypothesis is saying it is not equal, then alternative will be equal. If null hypothesis is saying it is equal, then alternative will it is not equal. So it is written here. You can see in the right hand side of the slide, the alternative hypothesis for the above example is mu G is not equal to mu P. Glass container is not equal to the preference of plastic container. So as we all know, where AJ represents alternative hypothesis and mu G and mu P are the mean score of the preference for glassware and plastic containers respectively. So we can say here, if something is not equal to another thing, so what are the other possibility? We can say, if X is not equal to Y, so then what is the relation between them? Now it means either X is greater than Y or Y is greater than X. X is greater than Y or X is less than Y. These are the only possibility if it is not equal. The same thing over here, that if glass container is not equal to the preference of plastic container, then what are the other possibility, like our third and fourth statement? More glass preferences are there in more plastic containers are there in comparison to glass container. The third E statement says, and the last as for the last statement, the glass containers are more than the preference of the plastic container. So these are the possible hypotheses. It depends upon the situation and depends upon the researcher how he or she is framing the alternative hypothesis, giving importance to which factor. This is all about alternative and null hypothesis and how to frame and when to frame the alternative and null hypothesis. Now coming to one other part of the testing hypothesis, it is type 1 error and type 2 error. What is the meaning of type 1 and type 2 error and why it is named so? Let us come and understand it. It is likely to find out may not be accurate since the result testing of a hypothesis are based on the data from a sample, and variability among the sample may never be completely eliminated until the sample is big as the population. So there are two different types of errors that can occur. That is given in the table 7.1. We can see here, suppose, let me discuss about the table I had given, I have cited here, that types of error in testing of hypothesis. We can see in the top of the table, this is decision based on sample. Here in the row, there is a state of population. Suppose my H0. What was my H0 in this particular example? Now there is no difference in packaging of glass and packaging in plastic. So this is the hypothesis and it is true. Suppose I found it is true. So if I found true, I accept it definitely. But it is true, but I am saying it is wrong. H1, we can see here, H0 is true, we are accepting, it is correct action. H0 is true, we are rejecting, it is a wrong action. Means it is a type 1 error we are committing. We are rejecting a true things, but we are rejecting. This is known as type 1 error. But coming to the second line, what is here? Now H0 is false, but we are accepting. The statement we proved or we are finding that it is wrong, but knowingly or unknowingly we are accepting it. It is also a wrong decision. So this is known as type 2 error. But if the statement is false, it is rejected, then it is a correct decision. So the wrong decisions are known as error. We understood what is error. Now the wrong decisions are error. But what is type 1 error? Now type 1 error is that error we are accepting a null hypothesis, or we are rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true, and we are accepting the null hypothesis when it is false. It is known as type 2 error and type 1 error respectively. So a type 1 error occurs when we incorrectly concludes that H0 is false when in fact H0 is true. Similarly, we can incorrectly accept H0 while H0 is untrue. The error is referred to as type 2 error. So type 1 error says H0 is false, but we are H0 is false when in fact H0 is true. But we are accepting H0 when it is true, when it is wrong, it is known as type 2 error. So think about the packaging decision making dilemma for the marketers. Marketing manager would commit a type 1 error if he rejects the null hypothesis H0 and chooses a plastic container while customers' mean preference of glass jars are actually no better. So a type 2 error might involve not selecting a plastic container when consumer preference is actually higher. Both those errors are bad and should be reduced to a minimum. However, they cannot be completely eliminated without looking at the entire population. In which case, the testing processes would be useless. So these two errors, however, cancel each other out for a given sample size. So this suggests that if the testing process is made to make the type 1 errors less likely to occur, the type 2 errors are also more likely to occur and vice versa. So a good balance between these two errors is the best that can be done. Now coming to the third concept of the testing of hypothesis, it is level of significance. Since type 1 error is expected to be more significant than the type 2 error in all tests of hypothesis, the likelihood of type 1 error must be carefully controlled. So this is accomplished by defining a significance level at which a test will be performed. So thus the probability of type 1 error is constrained by the significance level, and test procedures are created to obtain the lowest possibility and probability of type 2 error subject to the significance level. The sign alpha is typically used to denote the probability of type 1 error, while the symbol beta denotes the chance of a type 2 error. Now we can see here the entire process of the testing hypothesis. First, defining the problem statement, then from the problem statement we will formulate the hypothesis. After that we will select the appropriate statistical techniques, then declare the level of significance, that alpha value. Alpha value, I forgot to say that alpha value will be either 5%, 10% and 1%. 1% alpha value says 1% there is a chance I will make some mistake, but 99% I'm confident on my answer. While 5% says I'm 5% not confident, but 95% I'm sure that the result is correct. And similarly, 10% says 90 plus 10. So after deciding the level of significance, then data collection process, then data analysis, then interpretation. Now, coming to the first step, the identifying a problem. The first step in the process is to identify a broad problem area. The decision maker might become interested in things like a declines in sales, customer switching, and similar things. For instance, a retailer of fruits and vegetables would inquire as to why sales of organic products have fallen short of expectations. So if this is the broad problem, then from that we have to develop our hypothesis as per the second step of this hypothesis process. The variables are investigated in this step to determine their influences and contributions in describing the problems, cause, and potential solutions. So, null and alternative hypotheses are formulated as we have discussed earlier in this unit, that a null hypothesis is a statement of the status quo. As we are saying that it is a statement of status quo. What is there, it is there. No one, or you can say one of no difference or no effects, we will have to mention in the null hypothesis, and the null hypothesis is tested. If the null hypothesis is not rejected, no changes will be made. The expectation of a difference or impact contributions and alternative hypothesis. So changes will result if the alternative theory is accepted. As a result, the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis are the opposite. As we are saying, simultaneously both cannot happen. In marketing research, the null hypothesis is constructed in a way that if it is rejected, the desired conclusion will also be accepted. After a formulation of hypothesis, select a appropriate statistical tool. It says, we will not be able to test our hypothesis until a variable in the theoretical frameworks are measured in some way. So, a suitable statistical method must be chosen in order to test the null hypothesis. So, the sample statistics, sample distribution, and methodology used to calculate and test statistics should both be taken into account by the researcher. The test statistic quantifies the sample's degree of agreement with the null hypothesis, and a well-known distribution such as the normal test, t-test, or chi-square distribution is frequently followed by the statistics. Again, statistical test, many statistical tests there. If we will go for the parametric test, inferential statistics, there is parametric test, again non-parametric test. Depend upon the sample and data, we should choose an appropriate statistical tool for the data, for the analysis of the data. After deciding the statistical test, we will decide the level of significance about whom we were discussed, whether it is 5%, 1%, and 10%. So there is a chance that we will come to the wrong conclusion whenever we infer something about a population based on a sample. So as we have discussed, there are two types of error, that is type 1 and type 2 error might occur. There is a chance. So the level of significance affects how confidently a researcher rejects or accepts a null hypothesis. So prior to taking any samples, the level of significance indicated by the symbol alpha is decided, and the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true is indicated by the level of significance alpha, or we can say the alpha value. Although the value of alpha varies from problem to problem, it is typically taken to be either 5% or 1%. We can see here, if a person is saying 5% level of significance, means there is a high chances that 5 out of 100 he or she is confident that the null hypothesis will get rejected when it should be accepted, and this means that the researcher is 95% confident at a right decision he has been taken. So if we will consider 10%, so what is the meaning of 10% level of significance? Means the alpha value is equal to 10. It means 90% the researcher is confident about its decision, or you can say he has taken the right decision, but 10% he or she is not confident on his result or on his action. Similarly, 1%. 1% says 99% the researcher is confident on rejection or acceptance of the hypothesis, but 1% he or she is not confident on the result. After fixing the level of significance, the researchers should think about the data collection. It is necessary to collect the data with regard to each variable of the hypothesis which is mentioned, and we have decided how to measure the variables in that previous chapter. So these data are then used for the basis of data analysis. So as we are finding the or we are identifying the variables from the hypothesis, or we can say we are actually giving importance to the variable in the hypothesis. On the basis of hypothesis, we will move forward for data collection. We will give more focus on that variables while collecting the data from the respondent. So after collection of data, that data will go to the data analysis. So what we are doing in the data analysis, now we will determine whether the developed hypothesis has been supported. The data collected are statistically analyzed in the data analysis steps. For instance, we would not be to perform a correlational analysis to find the relationship between employee inactivity affects customers switching. So we will discuss the same thing in the next block, but it was all about the data analysis which will actually help us to get a result. After analysis of data, what result we found that need to be interpreted. So the result of the data analysis are interpreted in order to determine whether or not our hypothesis are validated or not. Depending on whether the result of the test statistics falls in the rejection or the acceptance zone, the hypothesis may be accepted or rejected. If the observed results have a probability or less than 5% and hypothesis is being tested at 5% level of significance, it would be rejected. What we said, now depending on whether the result of the test statistics falls on the rejection region, means if it is the value or the calculated value is exceeding the tabulated value, then we will say the hypothesis is rejected. In this situation, it is though that in this situation, what we will think that there is a significant difference between the sample statistics and the population parameter that is hypothesized. If the hypothesis is rejected, then after that, what we will do, we will use the SPSS tools for the analysis of the data. Suppose we can see here that the marketing manager of a farm has decided to launch a new ready to eat snacks. There is a new product or new snacks product ready to eat. Suppose a manufacturer is want to lunch in the market. So there are two minor variations of the product which have been developed. Both of these are basically similar but a bit different in their color, flavor and crispiness. So also both of these are highly perishable and have a shelf life about 48 hours. So the marketing manager decides to conduct a field trial for both product variants to find out if one is liked to better by the consumers as compared to the other. So he selected 20 shops which is very similar in the respect of their sizes, locations and climates. So after that, after selection of the softs, he introduces the first variant of the product, say X. In 10 of these softs are very similarly, he introduces the second variant of Y. He first introduced say X. After successful launch of X, then he introduced the second variant of the same product, say Y. In the other 10. So completely records are kept for the movement of these products for 15 days. So after that, the total sales in kilograms of X and Y in these shops are recorded. That data has been given here. We can see in the table 7.2. So what we will do here, now the first step of testing of this hypothesis, we frame the broad problem area. How to test the sales market potential of the two variant with this data. Then second problem, we define in our problem statement, which variant of product is higher sales potential and which has very less. Then in step 3, we frame the hypothesis as per our steps formulation of hypothesis, both null hypothesis we frame, and there is no difference. As we know, the null hypothesis says it is a status quo situation, there is no difference. The same we did here. There is no difference in between X and Y variant of product. So we can see here, in step 4, we select the appropriate test statistics and the level of significance we framed it is 1%, which make us more confident. Then we came to the step 6, that is data collection. For this purpose, we collected data from the 10 shops where we have launched our X product and Y product. From that, for 15 days, that data we recorded, that is a method of data collection we have here done. Then we came to our data analysis. So after collection of the data, we put this data into the software SPSS package. Here we can see the product X is here, and the sales is there, and the 15 days data is there. Then we take the analysis, how we analyze. Now it is given in the table 7.3. The mean and standard deviation of two variants of the product we have calculated. The mean is 11.50 for X, and 11.900 is for Y. Whereas the standard deviation is 2.59 for sale product X, and standard deviation for Y is 2.46. So the calculated p-value and the level of significance p-values are exhibited in the table 7.4. What is here? The t-value. What is the level of significance we had taken? It was 1%. It says 95% confidence interval for the difference we had taken. And the degrees of freedom are mentioned here. And the test statistics says it is 1.978. Let us see what we have done. This was the result. This is the result after analysis. Then what to interpret? So interpretation part is more crucial, and because the layman is going to understand it. What we interpret here, sales of two products variants that were launched into the market did not differ significantly. The calculated t-value, that is minus 0.353, has a significant value of the 0.728, which is higher than 0.1. So it concludes that the marketing manager may decide that both the product variants can be offered, as because there is no significant difference between these two products. So it was all about the steps, or you can say the process of testing hypothesis. The beginning from the problem identification to interpretation concludes 8 steps, which is really helpful for a researcher to conclude and to analyze and to test the data and the assumptions to be made. All these things are given in the process of the data collection. So in summary, we can say the true benefit of hypothesis testing in business and that it enables experts to validate their assumptions, or we can say scientifically it is hypothesis. And before acting on them, we discussed the stage of the hypothesis testing process. The null and alternative hypotheses are set up such that one of them and only one of them is always true, not that both will be true at a moment. As we said, it is a two side of the coin. In the absence of a strong evidence of any contrary, the decision maker would not willing to accept the null hypothesis. Of the two errors, also we discussed how these two errors to be minimized. Explicitly, we can say it is very easy to calculate and analyze the data if the data is very small. But if it is too large, definitely in marketing research, we are going to face a very huge data set. For that, we are bound to use SPSS and other softwares to analyze the data. So it was all about the testing of hypothesis process and the different types of error and how to minimize. Thank you.